Hey everybody, and welcome to another video from the Electronic Armory. In this video, we're going to have a picker choose the data that we're going to input to our text view here. So usually what you want to do is not allow the user to add their own text if you want to make sure that that text is normalized or at least matches up with what other users are putting into the system. This could be anything from capitalization to different wording for the same thing. And if you want to keep your data clean and efficient, then you want to be able to restrict the data that they can enter in. And so we're going to use a picker for this. And very much similar to our last video, the date picker, we're going to allow the user to put in whatever data they want to. So let's get started. So we went ahead and chose just a generic input here. This will be categories. Again, you can put in your own data. First thing we're going to want to do is get a reference to our text view here, or text field, I should say. Drag that in, and I'm just going to call it categories text field. So once we have a reference to this, we can start populating it with some data. So the first thing we need to do so that we let iOS know that we want to use a picker instead of the keyboard is to set its input view. So we just set its input view to a picker, but we don't have that picker yet. So let's go ahead and create that. So I'm going to actually create this as a member of this class, and we're going to instantiate it right here. So we're going to let the, let's call it a categories picker, and that is going to be of type UIPicker. Okay, so the picker view, and then we're just going to instantiate it here as I mentioned, just like so. All right, so once we have this variable created and instantiated, we're able to use it here. So I'm going to call this set the input view to the categories picker. Now we're not done yet because we have to set the picker, its delegate, to this class as well as the data source. So it actually selected data source first, which is fine. So we'll set it to self and then the delegate as well, which is the next thing here. Okay, so it's going to complain almost right away. Actually, I forgot to say self for this one, but it is going to complain right away because our class is not implementing that interface. So what we'll do here is go to the top and put a comma after the superclass that we're inheriting from the UI view controller, because this is a UI view controller subclass. And we're going to say this is a UI picker view, if I can spell it, picker view delegate, and it is a UI picker view data source. So UI picker view data source, go ahead and find those two options. So again, UI picker view delegate and UI picker view data source. This will complain because we're not implementing those methods yet. So click the stop sign with a circle in it, and that'll allow you to add those stubs for that protocol. So go ahead and say fix, and it'll add these two functions automatically. So I'm going to put these kind of near the bottom underneath our code. Not strictly required to put it underneath, but I just kind of like the flow that is organized from top to bottom where we set up our categories, and then the next methods down here allow us to customize that picker. So with pickers, we're able to add in multiple categories or components within that picker, and so you can have different sliders in the same view here. So we're just going to do one, but if you do two, you can see what it looks like in your own application. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing I'm hiding here. Let's go ahead and increase our code view just a little bit. All right, so then we have one component which will give us one slider within that picker, and then the next thing we want to look at is the number of rows in that component. So if you have different components, say you want a category and then a subcategory, such as sports, and then listing all those sports under it, and then you have another one that is like topics of interest, and then you have other, let's say, hobbies under that list. So you'd have one on the left, one on the right, etc. So the number of rows in this will be defined by your data. Usually what you can do is just stick everything in an array. So we can go ahead and do that right now. Let's just say we have a categories array. So again, depending upon where your app comes from or where your data comes from in your app, this will be unique to your application. But we're just going to say categories array, and this is going to be of type array. And let's just make these all strings. and we're going to set this equal to an array of strings. So I'm just going to type in some random data. So hobbies, sports, electronics, cars. Okay, you get the point. You can put in literally whatever you want. They are useful if they're strings because we can just display them as strings themselves. But if you do have a class that has objects within it, then you'd have to pull out that specific subobject. So in other words, instead of strings here, we would have another data type. Okay, so then down here, let's see, we have the categories array dot count, and that will just return the number of arrays in that. And I forgot to return this value as well as returning the value for here. Okay, so this will just return 1 when asked, and this will return the count in our array. Okay, so then we're not done yet, even though we don't have any required methods in order to satisfy this protocol. But what we do need to do is display the string in that category. So the easiest way to discover that and discover other functionality in your picker view is just type in picker view, and then you can find all the different methods in that picker view. As you can see, our autocomplete has filtered down on those. So we have the picker view width for component if you want to change up the different widths for those columns that get selected. You can do row height, did select the row, so what happens when you selected it. So we actually do want that one, but what I want to be doing first is the title for the row. And the title for the row, we're going to return a string, and that is simply going to be our category array and then the index of that array. So for example, it'll ask me, what should I show for row 0? So it'll be title for row, and then it gives you that row. So we're just going to use that row as our index into our array. So again, it'll ask us for 0. So we're just going to get the 0th index out of that array. So in this case, it'll be hobbies, and then index 1 is sports, and etc. And we're going to return those. And since those are strings, that'll satisfy our return type. Okay, but what happens when they select it? I want to populate whatever they've selected in our text view here, or text field, so that we have visual feedback of what just happened. Okay, so again, we're just going to type in picker view and then select from the ones we haven't implemented yet. So now our list is a little bit smaller. Did select row. So when I selected the row, when I stop on it, it'll go ahead and populate this text view, which we have a reference to up here called categories text field. So this one doesn't return anything, but we're going to say categories text field dot text to set the text within that text view, and then use our categories array again plus the selected row. So actually I could just copy this whole thing and set the text field text equal to whatever string is in that row's index. Now this will never ask us for an index out of the row unless we're dealing with multiple components. So if you're dealing with multiple components, you'll want to check the component first because you might have different number of rows within each component. So for example, we have one row that selects a category, and then the second row, or excuse me, the second column to select a subcategory, and they may have different numbers. And so if I'm trying to select a row that has a bigger number of rows inside of the current array that I'm looking at, then you're going to have issues. And so again, if you're using multiple components, then make sure you're checking the component index. Again, if I'm using 2, this component will come in as 0 or 1. I just check it to determine which array that I'm using for that data. Okay, so we're all good here. We're going to go ahead and run this and see what happens. So here we have our application running. So we set the input view of our text field. So when we select this, it'll pop up our picker. All right, so now we have our picker. We can go ahead and pick a particular piece of data that we have. And as I select or stop on that item, you can see that it's being populated with that data. So if you have a class a data class instead of these strings, you might have a different piece of data that it's actually selecting on, but displaying something else. So for example, we can easily fix this by saying you selected and then putting in using string interpolation, so backslash and then in parentheses that data, end parentheses or end quotes. You can put in some kind of custom piece of data along with your other data that you're actually pulling out from the array. And that might be useful just because that data might not look very pretty. And so if you want to make that a little bit better, you can say something like this. So I hope that makes sense. If not, ask questions down below. But this video was created for a subscriber by request. If you want to get your own issues resolved, I'm now taking on developers who want to take their development skills to the next level through my Patreon page. Becoming a patron will allow you access to our learning community to get one-on-one help from me, code you can use in your own projects, and many more resources to make you a stronger developer, whether you're developing games, Android or iOS apps, or even server or web applications. Sometimes you just need some feedback or career advice on your own projects. Follow the link in the description below to find out more info. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.